All right. Okay, let's get started. This is our second NetMod session. The note well, please note the note well. It has changed, has legal language in it. If you're not sure what it means, then please refer to your companies or your lawyer. We need to have some note takers. Please join Etherpad. Can we have anybody else who's going to join Etherpad? Okay, 1 and 2. There's Michael. Where's Michael? Michael's not here. Our secretary's not here. Okay, hopefully our secretary, but still we have 2, so we're good. We're on Jabber and Meetup. We got 2 on Meetup. So today's session, schema mount, tree diagram, routing area working group update, interface module update, mounting. This is the peer mount document. Alex is actually in the room next door, so we might have to be flipping the Yang catalog and Alex's peer mount, depending on if he gets in time. I think our secretary Michael's going to ping him when his time slot is coming up, so hopefully he'll be coming in time, but just in case, we might be flipping those 2. And we don't need to do that.
I think just go back to the Etherpad, just show the link. So we really could use some more people on Etherpad. This link's a little hard to use. It's best just go to the last link to the tools page, tools.ietf.org/wg/netmod, and then click on agenda, and you can get to the Etherpad that way.
Click on minutes.
Minutes, sorry. And please join in. We only have a few people on. It'd be very helpful to join in, add something, correct something. We would appreciate it. Anything else on this?
No.
Okay.
We're good. Okay, so for our first presentation, schema mount. And
hi, good afternoon. Work. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Láďa Hotkant. I am going to talk about Yang schema mount draft. It's now 6th revision of this draft. And basically, the only main change compared to the revision 04 that I presented in Chicago is a new mechanism for referencing instances in the parent tree. In Chicago, we had some discussion about that, and the previous mechanism didn't seem just right, so we tried to come up with something different. So I will talk about that later. And then one thing that was implied, we do not need to make the mounted schemas conditional by means of including some when XPath statement in the use schema data that could be evaluated and then make the mounted schema conditional, because this can now be achieved through a normal Yang when statement with the use of the new parent references mechanism. So this parent tree references, we have discussed it already several times, so let me just review the motivation for that. First, there is an agreement. As you know, we have 2 ways of defining a mounted schema. One is so-called inline, that basically uses an embedded Yang library for defining the schema. So there is an agreement, I would say general agreement in the working group, that this inline way of defining the mounted schema will be really relatively simple. And so for one, there should be no escape from so-called mount jail. So no parent references are possible in this case. However, for the use schema method of defining the mounted schema, as it turns out, it's often useful to be able to reference things in the parent data tree, especially in XPath expressions like must statements, but also in leafref references, for example. So here is an example coming basically from the network instances draft. Maybe it's not the current revision but the idea is basically the same. So in the case of network instances, as you can see on the data tree, we have a list of interfaces that's global. It means that's shared by all network instances, whereas routing configuration, routing stuff, and other things are specific for each network instance. But of course, from a routing configuration, we often need to refer to interfaces. And so for this purpose, we need, if it's set up as it is in the NI draft, we have this mounted schema for every network instance, and we need to refer to that global list of interfaces. So for this purpose, we need some way of, because normally the list of interfaces wouldn't be accessible inside the mounted schema. We need some way how to escape from the mount jail. And the mechanism that's currently proposed in the draft is to use, so as I said, it's only for the use schema method of defining the mounted schema. So inside the use schema list, which is state data, of course, we have this additional parent reference. It's actually a leaf list containing one or more XPath expressions. And the idea is that as soon as we perform any XPath evaluation inside the mounted tree, which includes also leafref references and possibly instance identifiers. So these parent reference expressions specific to that mount point are evaluated. These expressions have to result in or each of the expressions should result in a node set in terms of XPath 1.0, and then a union of these node sets is taken, and for the purpose of evaluating XPath expressions inside the mounted tree, these resulting the union of the node sets is added to the available tree, which means that from XPath expressions and leafrefs and so on, we can refer to selected nodes from the parent tree. There are some technical points, of course, about XPath evaluation. So currently, the context node for this parent reference is the root of the parent tree. And one thing that's somewhat annoying is that we have to define or specify the namespace declaration that XPath requires. So this is done basically inside the state data defining the mounted schemas. So this mapping from prefixes to namespaces is done there. So that's something that need to be added to those state data. I have to again emphasize that this is only, so these nodes are only available, used for XPath evaluation, which means, for example, that these parent tree nodes are not available to protocols like netconf or restconf, only for XPath evaluation. And each time an XPath evaluation is performed, the current status of the parent tree is reflected, and only those nodes that exist at the moment are added to the mounted tree. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, I'm Dhanendra. I'm just wondering how this reference is different from bind NI name reference that we have in the interfaces to associate those with a particular NI. Here it seems like from within the NI we are referencing the interfaces. How this is different from binding an NI name method?
Well, as far as I remember, this binding is done in the parent tree. So essentially for every interface, you can specify that this interface is bound to specific network instances. But this is about XPath expressions inside the mounted tree, right? So we have some data model for routing protocol, for example. This Yang module by itself doesn't know anything about network instances. It could be used for standalone routers, no problem. But this data model may refer to interfaces. So if we have network instances, then of course we need to somehow get outside of the mount jail and be able to refer the global list of interfaces. I will have an example later with this bind. So what this means here, for example, this example means that from the, as you can see here at the bottom, we will be able after this, from the mounted tree, from the network instance, we will be able to refer to anything that's inside the interfaces container. So all interfaces, no matter what network instance they are bound to. So that's, maybe it's not the right thing, and I will have one open issue about that. So this is really about enabling XPath expressions to refer to something that's outside that the data model that's mounted doesn't know about.
Okay, so not only for the XPath evaluation, but from here one can refer to a particular instance of interface and use it here, right?
Yes.
Okay, but the interface tree itself is not available here. It's available only for the in the context of any evaluation of such as when statement or must statement.
Inside the mounted tree, you can use restconf, for example, to get these interfaces. They are not there. They are only added for the purpose of XPath evaluation.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Balázs Lengyel Ericsson. 2 questions. If we have multiple levels of mounting, let's say 3 levels, is there a way from the 3rd level to access the base level? Because this seems just one step to the parent.
No, currently it's not possible. So it assumes that you can only refer to things that are in the immediate parent, right? So
because I think because you have the recursive support, you could support that. Using the same solution for recursive support, you could export from one to the second, and then from the second to the third.
Yeah, with another level of complications, of course, it would be possible. But of course, if we have several routes that can be used for evaluating these parent reference expressions, we have to specify which route we have in mind, and it becomes pretty tricky. So I would personally, but basically, I don't think that it's very sensible to define many levels of schema mounts. So what we are addressing here basically is the network device model, LNEs and NIs, and that's about it.
Lou Berger speaking as a contributor to the LNE and NI model. If you're thinking about the case where you have a physical device that you then put into one of these logical systems or an LNE, and then from there go into VRFs, it turns out that you would have 2 separate instances of exports, and you wouldn't have to do this. It wouldn't turn into a parent reference of a parent reference. So we're from the user standpoint, we're not envisioning needing that right now, even though I think you can do it with the recursive solution that's available.
It would be good to have some statement on this recursive possibility or its absence or whatever.
I think there's a section on it.
Okay. Next question is, if, let's say I have interfaces both in the base and also mounted at some level, will I get into problems if I have the same keys for interfaces? Because the keys are only unique on the same level, but suddenly with the XPath reference, I can see both set of interfaces.
I think we discussed this last time. And so basically from the standpoint of XPath evaluation, you can have anything. So you can have both. So it will evaluate to something. But I believe in the current revision, there is some, at least some warning that this shouldn't be done. So as soon as you use interfaces in the parent schema and you want to use this parent reference mechanism, it's not advisable to use interfaces inside the mounted.
And keep in mind, this is an implementation time thing. So if someone can figure out an implementation that makes sense in their implementation, that's their choice. But no one's forced to do that. May not really make sense to do it, but if you think it does, it's your box. You get to code it the way you want to.
This is just a curiosity. Phil Schaefer, Chamber Networks. This is just a curiosity thing, but if I've mounted 3 levels, when I'm here and refer to slash, I'll get here. If I then refer to a node's parent, won't I get here? Doesn't that just automatically fall out of your XPath? Yeah,
if you have several levels and you use this parent reference in the second and third level, so this third level refers to the second level, and the second level refers to the first level. So
you will be able to hop out that way.
One step like up in the schema hierarchy.
Okay.
Okay, so I already commented on that example. So let me say again that this particular example means that interfaces are available for every network instances, but we do not really discriminate between interfaces that are bound to that network instance and others. But basically, it's the same way how it works if you used, say, an augment instead of the schema mount mechanism, right? There are, in my view, there are 2 open issues that have been discussed among the authors and contributors, but they are, I believe, not mentioned in the current revision of the draft. But I think it's worth mentioning these issues here because they may be raised later, and I would like to ask all potential authors of modules using schema mount to consider what it means for their data models. So one is about that context node that's used for parent reference evaluation, and then another option is to define these parent references directly inside the mount point definition. I will have more to say about that later. But let's start with that context node. So as I said, currently the context node is the root node of the parent data tree. Another option that I believe Martin Bjerklund proposed was to use the node containing the mount point. So this alternative, of course, would have the advantage that if you look at that example here,
yeah, the red.
Yeah. So in this case, it means that the context node would be this root node, and it means that for every, well, this is a list of network instances, so we will have a different context node for every network instance, and that means that we could do these nice things. So this would be the parent reference expression, and we could indeed formulate this restriction that only interfaces that are bound to that network instance will be available for XPath evaluation inside that particular network instance. So that's of course nice, but on the other hand, I believe it just adds another level of complexity to what we already have. So if you consider that these parent references are used for when expressions inside the mounted schema, that means that we have some, even the mounted schema somehow depends on stuff that's in the parent data tree. So although there are pros and cons here, in my opinion, and I believe it's also Martin's opinion, unless this is really felt to be necessary, this should be avoided, because we have all kinds of complexity now being added to Yang, and I'm really worried about this. So any comments on that? You see, yeah.
AC, Lindum, Cisco Systems. No doubt this would be useful. I don't think, independent of if and when this is integrated, I don't think you should call it a context node. I mean, that really threw me off. And then you explained what it is, and I said, oh, that's what it is. Maybe you could call it parent reference filtering or something like that instead of context node.
Well, as long as we are using XPath for these purposes, I think it's appropriate to use the terminology of XPath, and basically context node for every XPath expression is where the expression is supposed to start, right? So where from, if you have relative paths, so where these relative paths start. And in our case, it means, because in the current situation, we get the same results of this parent reference evaluation for all network instances. Whereas if we have this root as the context node, we can really have different results, right? So I think it needs some more discussion, maybe in the mailing list, and some feedback from people writing data models.
So option 1 is the current choice. Is that also the author's preference?
Sorry?
Is that also the author's preference?
Yeah, it's currently,
okay.
Because as I said, we don't want to add really more complexity because it would be really difficult to write any tools working with this properly.
So you can take it to the mailing list, and if there's no objections within a certain amount of time, then it'll become.
And the second open issue, it's, again, there are some pros and cons. The idea is here because, as you saw, currently the parent reference XPath expression is defined inside the state data that define the mounted schemas using that use schema method. Here in this proposal, it would be different, and it would mean that we would have another Yang extension called parent reference, say, that will define these XPath expressions inside the mount point definition that appears in Yang modules, as you know. So, of course, the advantage would be that in a Yang module, we already have some namespace mapping, some namespace declarations, mapping of prefixes to namespace URIs. So in this case, we wouldn't need that namespace prefix definitions separately in state data. They could be inherited from the Yang module where the mount point statement appears. But there are drawbacks also. First, because we use this mount point extension both for inline and use schema method. And as I said, we want to use these parent references only for the use schema. It means that if a mount point is used for the inline and contain this parent reference, it doesn't make any sense. So we would need to add some CLRs to say that in this case the parent reference is ignored, let's say. So it really, again, makes it a bit confusing. And second, and maybe more important thing is that, in my opinion, extensions should be used only sparingly, because especially extensions like this that really change the meaning of the data models. That means that client that doesn't understand it cannot simply understand the data model, and different clients may end up with different validation results, for example, or just break. So basically, if we use extensions for such purposes, it means that we create a new Yang version without using a different Yang version number, and I think this is just not possible. And if we do it in more cases, we could end up with several incompatible Yang versions, and all this will be just mess. So I believe it's okay if we use this mount point as a label in a Yang module and then define everything elsewhere. But if we do this, it will be, again, not a proper use of extensions, at least in my view. So the proposal here is to stick to the current solution and define the parent references inside the use schema list as state data as it is now, and avoid introducing any new Yang extensions for this. Any comments? If not, then basically I think that I'm done.
It would be good to see if anyone has opinions on the second issue.
Rob Wilton, I'm not sure I have an opinion.
Can you lean in a little? I can't hear you.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. I'm not sure I have an opinion, but I'd be curious to know, what does Martin think of this? Does he also have the same opinion as you?
I think currently Martin agreed with the current text of the draft, which uses the current solution. So I believe that he agrees. But
because you've already got an extension statement for the mount point anyway, haven't you?
Sorry?
You already got an extension for the mount point anyway, have you?
Yeah, the mount point extension is still there, and so it's currently the way how to identify the mount point, and this will stay there. So I am not arguing against extensions in general, but this particular addition, this parent reference extension.
I guess I have a slight preference for this, probably, but I've not looked at it closely.
For this extension?
Yeah, I think so. But that's just a feeling.
Balázs Lengyel, is it my mistake if I say that this actually gives the control of exporting the internals of the parent model to the parent model?
That's basically true.
I think that may be an even more important question. Who controls what you can access from the parent model? Maybe even more important than the notation.
This is true, but I would say that if you do this, so you probably, so the author of the parent module has to envision somehow what the contents of the mounted schema is going to be. So whether a schema is mounted that might make use of interfaces in this case, right? So yeah, you are right that basically this means that the author of the parent module can immediately tell, I want to make this available to all mounted schemas.
So this, Balázs Lengyel again, this can be a good thing or a bad thing, because it allows you to control what you expose, and modularity is good. On the other hand, you have to envisage or somehow see forward what's happening.
It's true that I should have mentioned that this also moves the responsibility. Currently we have it as an implementation time feature, where this would be more Yang module design time. Lou?
Lou Berger, as contributor to this work, I raised this point, and I see a use case for it and would like to see it. And both authors, Martin and Lada, pushed back pretty hard, and I was going to raise the design time. is that the statement, and I don't remember whether Lotta it was you or Martin who said that this brings it into design time mounts. And right now, design time mounts are sort of out of scope of this document. And while as a contributor, I'd really like to see it there, as a user of this is good enough. So as the person who raised it, I'd say that we can live with the current text.
Yeah, that's okay. My argument against this is that if we want really to do this, we need to create a new Yang version that includes this parent reference or even mount point as a regular statement, because this really changes a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, that gets into the philosophical discussion we had the last meeting about how we do extensions. Do we do incremental or wholesale? And I'm not sure I really want to go there right now, but what I'll say is I think it is fair to say that we can consider this when we start talking about design time mounts, and that this is just one form of it, and it makes sense to do design time all together rather than piecemeal. So I think this is a reasonable approach by you and Martin.
So Jürgen, do you want to comment?
Jürgen Schönwelder, I might just not have understood it, but why do you think this is causing a problem with the Yang language version?
Because extension is just some addition, and clients or implementations in general needn't just know about it. So if an implementation doesn't know about mount point, there are other problems, but I mean that it could, for example, if it understands mount point but doesn't understand parent reference, it would mean that evaluation of XPath expressions inside the mounted schema or inside the data that belong to the mounted schema could give different results, because in one case you have these extra nodes available in the mounted data, and in another case these won't be available, so XPath expressions could give different results, right? So that's not...
Okay, but it's a substatement of a mount point statement, so yes. I would expect that either you understand both or you understand none of them, so I'm not sure. And if you don't understand any of them, you just...
Yang spec says that you can, of course, an implementation can ignore any extension statement.
We need to wrap this up. Last comment, please.
Maybe it's a more general question. I thought that if you declare support for a Yang module, that means that you must support any extensions defined in that Yang module. It's not your choice that I support one or maybe none. If you support this module, you support all of them. Asking for the maybe Yang doctor's clarification. Does it, if I support the Yang module, does it mean that I must support all the extensions defined in that Yang module?
Yeah, but in fact, problems already start with the mount point extension, because in this case, you can have some modules in your Yang library that do not belong to the normal top-level schema, so the client could get confused, right? So
I think the answer is yes, and we can go double check the spec, but I think the answer is yes.
It's probably a qualified yes, if anything. It means that you understand it, you know how to behave, but things like features may mean that you never actually use it.
Yeah.
So a qualified yes.
Okay, so just any more slides?
No.
Okay, so both open issues have preferred solutions that we just need to verify on list, and then we can potentially take this as last call. But first, I need to ask the working group: does the working group believe this document's ready for last call?
Hands?
Hands, please. Up. Ready for last call? Okay, so we'll look forward to an updated document once these issues are resolved. And actually, I do have one question though. There's in the NetConf working group, there's the Yang library discussion, and in that maybe there'd be a relationship to schema mounts. So does this document have any dependency to that work?
Yeah, I I think I expressed my opinion, and you were in favor of somehow integrating the schema mount to the new version of Yang library. So I don't know if this is. I think Andy was strongly against that, but
Right. But is there a dependency on? Would there be a dependency that would potentially hold up our ability to take this document to last call?
currently there is no dependency because we use another version of Yang library inside the schema, right? So, but it means that we can use different revisions of the same module in the parent schema and in the mounted schema. I don't know if it's a good thing or not. So I would actually prefer to have everything in one, all modules that are used throughout the system in one Yang library, and then just refer to it from new schema.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
So I think I just want to clarify your statement. I first heard you. I think I heard you say, "No, there's not a dependency. We can move forward."
Currently, there is no dependency, but I think.
But you wouldn't mind waiting until we have a complete solution.
You know, we also had the discussion about adding that module set ID.
Yeah.
So this is just because we have different sets of modules in different Yang libraries. So if we have only one library, we could just have one module set ID, and then I think it would be just easier to understand what the data model really is than if you have to somehow go from one place to another, read another Yang library, and so on.
So yes, we can move forward, but it's okay also to wait and optimize.
I think we can move we can move further, but if a new revision of the Yang library document is somehow looming or something, that maybe we should consider simplifying these things even more.
Well, I don't think that version is still an individual draft, right? It's not even a working group draft yet, so.
So we'll have to wait until tomorrow's NetConf session for more information.
Yeah.
I would say as chair, if we have a document that's ready to go and can go, we shouldn't wait for an individual draft or even a -00 working group draft to gate our work. We should make progress. And if we need to come back later, we have to come back and rev it. There's a lot of discussion about working groups doing things faster, getting models out faster, and being more open to revving models. So.
Good thing is that this is not going to influence module authors, so this is just some.
Okay, great, thank you. And next we have tree diagram. And thank you, Lou.
This is a document. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. Hi, I'm Lou Berger. This is a document that I put together, really starting out purely as editor, meaning I was taking other people's work and just putting them into a document. And it was Martin's work on how to represent trees. Since then, I'd say I've become a co-author because I wrote a whole bunch. But I'm presenting largely because Martin isn't here. So previously, we've talked about this last time. We had a problem where we had tree representations everywhere and had to figure out what was different in each document. So instead of doing that, we're consolidating in one place for an authoritative definition of trees and to ensure that we have consistency across our documents. So we've had 2 revisions since the last meeting. The first was to publish the working group version -00, exactly what we presented in the previous meeting. And then we have 01, which did what we said we planned to do at the last meeting, which is fill in a whole bunch of sections. There is still one section I'll mention in a moment that's missing. The other thing we did is we figured we have a proposal on how to represent schema mount. I want to emphasize that this is a proposal, and we would like feedback from the working group on if this is a good direction or if there's preferred alternatives. So I think I went through most of these pieces. There's a little detail here. In the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight the one piece that we haven't thought about or we haven't discussed or documented is how to represent extensions. Right now, they don't show up in some tools. I don't know about all tools because I don't run all tools, but they're generally not shown in the tooling. But we should think about whether or not we want to represent them in documents. Jurgen's looking at me like I'm crazy, so maybe I misspoke. Go ahead.
Rob Wilson. One comment I should have provided this on the alias. X is used both for deprecated and -X for RPCs and actions. I think it might be worth checking a module with deprecated output to check that's not too confusing. I have a feeling it might be, so just one thing is worth checking.
If you can repeat, do you have a specific proposal of what you'd like to see?
Something not X in one of the cases.
Okay, so I think that's a good point. Please do raise it on the list.
Yep.
One of the things that we discussed at the last meeting that relates to this is whether we should change some of the old notation to make it clearer and maybe like RO versus RW, is there something better there? And what we sort of felt, and we read the consensus of the room, is it's better not to change something unless there's a real need.
Yep.
Just so that we're consistent with the existing published documents and things people are familiar with.
Yep.
So I think with the proposal of what do we change it to, is it worth it?
Yes, I agree. I think this
and I personally don't have an opinion that's strong right now.
Yeah, this might be a case that there is a need, I think, is the point I'm making.
Great. I'd love to discuss it on the list, particularly because Martin isn't here,
Yep.
but also so that we get a good discussion on it. And if you can propose what you would like to see,
Okay.
more than just not X, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
So I'm moving on to the schema mount additions. What we came up with is that for a mount point, we use MP. Pretty straightforward there. For a mounted module, / sort of like what you see as a directory in ls-f, and an @ sign for a parent reference, sort of like a link. There's one other bit in the schema definition. You can define whether a schema is mounted read-only. How do we represent that? Well, we just use RO for the module that's brought in. So there's no extra flag. It's just that even though the module, if in its normal mount point would be RW, in the read-only case, or config leaf equals false, we would just say RO there. So that's a little bit of a subtlety, but it seemed like a good compromise. Again, this is a proposal. It's a working group document, which means we need working group consensus on it, but it's also a new proposal. So we really would like to hear feedback on it. You want to go back one?
I think here, I think this is not possible to say that. Yeah, maybe in some special cases, but in general, if you have these schema mount references, it's really about instance data. So whereas this tree describes the schema, right? So in general, it really depends on the evaluation of the parent reference XPath expressions. So it could happen, not in the example that I gave, of course, because it's all the same. But if we have more complicated XPath expression, it could happen that sometimes interfaces will be available, but sometimes they won't be available using parent references. So this is...
You're getting to a really interesting point, which is why are we even showing what a schema mount tree looks like?
Yeah.
Because that's not something that you would see at design time.
Yeah.
But we do believe that this goes to the question that was asked in the schema mount discussion of, if I'm a vendor and I want to relay to my customers what it is that my schema really looks like, we think that there's going to be this representation. And I think we have that with that appropriate caveat in the document. If there isn't enough text around that, we should improve the text.
So it's true that if we use that parent reference extension, which is really the design time, then in this case it would be clear immediately that what is available and what isn't, right? But not as it.
Yeah, exactly. So this might be a little forward-looking. It might be a limited use case right now, but we think at least I think it's worth including. It's a proposal. If the working group for some reason doesn't want us to include it, we can remove it. You'll see that we're going to use it in several cases with the discussing the examples of LNE and network instance. So we're already making use of this in our documents in the example cases.
Okay, Jürgen Schönwiller, so I understand correctly that the interfaces at thingy can only be generated if I have state information. So I can't get it out of the schema.
Correct. Well, what do you can get it out of the state data, yeah. Correct. Absolutely correct. And so right now, the only place this is being used is in examples where you have the example state data and then what the tree looks like to match that state data. So we wouldn't expect to see it in a module definition, but we're using it in examples.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson. Am I right in saying that even the top two lines, the mounted modules, can only be known if I know the state data? So my question is actually, how would a tool like Pyang know what to put there, or is it just a manual notation?
So here's an example of an actual module. It's shown with an augmentation. The yellow is an augmentation. The base model is in black, and here's the mount point. So the only thing you would see in an actual schema, in an actual module definition, would be the mount point. You wouldn't see anything underneath it. So only the MP would show up from schema data, from schema information.
In the long run, there will be a need, as you said, vendors want to show the full tree.
That's it. And we need something to show in our examples.
Okay, maybe not today, but there will be a need.
So we see the need immediately when we want to show this example of network instance.
Something totally unrelated, but which just popped up because you have comments there after the ellipses. Start.
Oh, that's not it. That comment isn't part of the tree representation. I just did that before.
But if you create something manually, it might actually be nice.
Yeah, the comment there is not part of the definition. That was. Should we put comments in the trees? Do you want comments in the trees? That actually hasn't come up before, or at least in my thinking. Well, if someone would like to propose how to take comments from the tree, which I imagine would come out of description, and I'm not sure if what you would do there. Maybe.
Rick Taylor, quick comment on comments. They're really helpful everywhere. I know it's extra work to try and work out how to put a comment in there, but if you don't put a comment in, someone's going to just try and shoehorn a comment in anyway. I kind of assumed comments were available in trees, but nobody used them.
Yeah, but since these tree diagrams are usually created by tools, that would mean that we need to have some way how to express these comments in Yang modules. And my second objection to this is that we already, these tree diagrams are often, the lines are quite long, so if we have the types and so on, and if we add some comments, it will just run off the right margin. So I don't know, of course. If in a presentation one can usually add some comments in another font so that it's clear, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was immediately thinking about, all right, what's the Yang change to do this? Do we now, instead of along with description, we have comment, or do we say the first n characters of the description? So if someone is interested in comments, I'd say send a proposal to the list. I'll talk to Martin about it, see if he has any opinions, but if anyone in the room or on the list has an opinion, please send a proposal, and then we can consider it as the working group.
Chris Hobbs. So we have when we have new formattings for RFCs, do these get prettified, prettified?
No clue. Right now I do XML, that gives me HTML. I don't do SVG.
Yeah, I'm actually, the question really was based on the idea of the line wrapping, right? And not wrapping at 72 characters, so that would actually.
We do have a recommendation to wrap in the document right now.
Yeah, I know.
We did put that in there. So where are we going next? We're going to fill in the TBDs. I believe the only thing is the extension. We really would like confirmation from folks on the tree representation, including the schema mount representation. Please take a look at it. Please send comments to the list. This is highly stylistic and subjective. Some things are easy to change right now, like the schema mount part. Other pieces which have been used for a long time, we want to resist change, but make changes if it adds a lot of value. Please discuss this on the list. We need consensus. If we don't get more feedback and we make these changes on extensions, we think we're going to be ready for a last call, and then maybe the last call becomes the forcing function. I don't have a specific timeline for getting the extensions done. I would hope in the next few weeks, but we have vacations and things. And so as soon as that clash is done, we'll have a proposal for that one open section.
Benoit Claes, so it's fine to have this document, but do you have the commitment from the tool developers like Piang and Yang Lins that we will have this output at the same time we've got an RFC? Because otherwise it doesn't make sense, right?
The only thing we are really changing so far from the existing tooling is the addition of MP for our schema mount point. That's it.
So Jung-Schönwelder, you talked about the extension. So the extension section is empty at the moment?
Correct. It says TBD.
Do the authors have any idea what they want to do?
We haven't talked about it. We ran out of time.
Because, I mean, the whole structure is according to the nesting structure of data objects or RPCs or notifications in the tree, and extensions are not supposed to add anything like that, right? So why do you want to do something about extensions?
Representing where an extension, I don't know yet, is the answer.
Okay.
It's a TBD because we haven't gotten there.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson, is it usage of extensions or the definition of extensions that you are thinking about, or both?
Usage.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, good. Thanks.
Please send feedback if you have it.
Yeah, we're running behind, so please, AC.
Escape.
Oops.
So as Ken said, we're running behind. I'm going to go relatively fast. I'm going to give an update, and it's good the context provided by both Lada and Lou's presentations. Next slide. Okay, what I'm going to go through are the 3 working group documents for that the Yang routing design team is working on, and where we are on those. We have 2 other drafts that are non-working group drafts. Well, I guess one, the logical organization is a working group draft, but it's kind of gated by the tags, which is an individual draft. So I'm not going to talk about those today. There's going to be more work done on those. And NDMA next steps. We plan to respin 8022 with only the NDMA changes. We're not going to try and do anything so that we can do this relatively quickly. And we'll hopefully do that in the next month or 2.
So just the module tags, we basically thought that they needed some more time to bake. There weren't any comments on it. So I don't think we want to sit on it either. So I think we'll look at pushing it forward, maybe calling for a working group adoption after this IETF.
Dejan Bogdanovic on tags, because there are some other activities on where they could come useful. Forgot now the name of a draft. It was discussed in the ops area. So having tags, for the Yang catalog and for the Yang library, that so that we could put those 2 works those works together. We should make some decisions on that part.
Okay, these drafts are really dependent on schema mount. Now that schema mount is moving forward, I think we can move forward with both the network instance and LNE drafts. They also have been updated to use the new tree representation for mount points that Lou just talked about. We hope to see working group last call soon. One thing for specifically we see for these drafts, you remember Lada's design issue 1, open issue 1 on slide 6 that he talked about, that the XPath the XPath references didn't allow you to specify context or filtering for the XPath. And finally, there's a lot of times where we have a given model and we know we always want to mount it. So we can foresee that future work on the design time mounts. In other words, you specify a mount point in a module. You also say this model is always mounted there. We see that as a useful function. And we're ready, we feel we're pretty much ready for working group last call in the routing working group. As a reminder, the LNEs, these are logical network elements. These are like your virtual routers. I don't know what they call them on
AC.
iOS
Finish
6.
up in 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Pretty much answered the Yang Doctor review, added terminology sessions. See, I'm not going to go. I won't go through the example. One thing to see here, we added a notification if when you tried to bind the LNE to an interface in the RFC 7223 interface list, if it failed, we have a notification for that. Here's just an example. You see, you see in that tree, that's mounted stuff that's under the mount point in the LNE. There it is. This has both routed. It says manage true. In the interest of time, I won't go through that again. We discussed it in previous IETFs. So please review this draft. I think having Yang experts review it in addition to the routing working group would be ideal, since it makes heavy use of the schema mount extension. NI, there's going to be more on the LX VPN. That's we're going to talk about that in more detail tomorrow in the second afternoon session in the BEST working group. Let's see what else is anything interesting here. More examples in Appendix D. I think for network instance, the examples are really important. We have what we did for, because a network instance corresponds directly to an L2 VPN and L3 VPN, and we have a third type that's a combination, you know, for your integrated router bridge of an L2, L3 VPN. We added mount points for those, and we also added an NI type. Now the NI type is also a choice where you can put information that's always going, via augmentation, you put information there that's always applicable to that type of VPN. And here's just an example of that. That's an augmentation. So as you'll see tomorrow in BEST, the LX VPN models will make use of augmentation under NI type, and they'll make use of they'll augment mounted schema under the NI type specific mount points. Dan?
Yes, on the L3PN state, this is sort of a detail, but I think we should start thinking about timestamping for that. As I've been thinking about this lately, is when I'm looking at the state, that I should know which.
Sorry to do this. That belongs in the routing working group, that
does.
comment.
Yeah.
This is just a readout on what's happening there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, like this example, we have the old style. This isn't in the MDA either format, and hopefully they'll go to that
with that model. And here I referred to these. These are the well-known mount points that the different types of network instance will make use of. And again, we added a notification for the case where you try and bind an interface in your RFC 7223 interface list. Actually, it's the one, the RFC for the IP specific interfaces. If you try and bind it to an IPv4 or IPv6 interface and that fails, then we have a notification for that. I forget that. Is that RFC 77 or something? RFC 7277? I don't remember. And here's just an example of the augmentation that L3 VPN is going to make to NI type. And the fact that that if you have an L3 VPN, you'd have a specific mount point where you'd put everything under there. Like for instance, your IETF routing module and your protocol, and in that you have to list the control plane protocols. Well, there they are. And you might have OSPF as one of your control plane protocols, and that would all be mounted under there, just like what we affectionately know as VRFs or context or whatever your favorite vendor calls them. And yeah, here's just a full network instance tree. And a lot of this does not include anything that's mounted right now or augmented. We already talked about that. We think we can get around that. You see, we're going to accept the limitation and let it be an implementation, even though it's not enforced in the schema with the parent ref. An implementation could enforce that you couldn't access an interface that didn't have a bind interface name of the specific network instance that is referencing it. And again, please review this document, as we don't have all the Yang experts in the routing working group. And finally, in addition to IETF types, we have a new draft. We've had a lot of good feedback lately. One problem with this is like your kitchen sink. And every time we think we're done, somebody asks us to add one more thing that they think is going to be common across a number of Yang modules. And so we've been adding those. One thing that we did also, we split out the IANA, the address families and the BGP SAPIs into IANA maintained registries, similar to the models that are for the interface types that are also IANA maintained via RFC 7224. Let's see if there's anything interesting. Yeah, you can see with the geo coordinates, we don't feel those drafts are mature enough. I'm on some of those, and none of them are working. There's one in Lisp that Dino's the editor of. There's one in BGP and one in OSPF and ISIS. So we're gonna pull that out and put that into separate modules if we want to go forward with routing types, given that all the routing models refer to those, so we can get that published.
AC, can you please wrap up? Oh, that was it?
That was it.
Okay, great. And we currently have 27 minutes to go through 40 minutes worth of scheduled materials. So if all the presenters could please step through their slides quickly. As quickly as possible. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have a very quick update on 2 drafts, interface extensions, and the sub-interface Yang model, and also a 0.0 individual draft that solves one of the problems that's going to be discussed here. So they all link together. Basically, since the last IETF on the interface extensions draft, I've updated on the feedback from last IETF. I've had a Yang Docs review from Andy. Thanks, Andy. So I've fixed all those things, except for 2 issues remaining. The first, I need to provide examples. That's just work I need to do. Nothing exciting. The second one is this sort of sub-interface property, which is meant to be a way of trying to abstract away a list of interface type dependencies, instead to have a common property instead. The solution I've got in this or these 2 drafts doesn't really work very well. It has problems. It's not extensible. I think I have a better solution in this /00 draft. So I'm going to present that draft towards the end of this, and then wait for comments on whether people think that's a good idea to do, and then also what we do with these drafts, whether we wait or progress them anyway. Oh, so I've said the resolution anyway. So I'll ask for comments at the end of that. The subinterface VLAN model status, again, the same. This hasn't had a Yang Doctors review, but again, it's close to being complete, I think. I want to try and get these two models out the door to try and be a bit quicker. The main change I've made is some simplification to make the structure a bit easier. Rather than using a list of tags, there's now explicit tag names. There's one simplification still that needs to be done. That's based on the IEEE groupings. So once they're fixed, and I import them, they'll also get fixed. There's also an issue raised by Vladimir in terms of the compile. So that's one person who's already trying to use or is using these models. So again, another justification to try and get them out the door. So what have I changed and fixed? This is what it was in the old draft. You'll see this is the L3 case. The other ones, the L2 is similar. There was a list of VLANs with an index into that list, which is what's required config-wise. That's a bit messy to actually have to handle. So instead, I've now got two explicit tags, outer tag, second tag. And you could extend this in future with further tags down the stack if you had to, although I don't actually expect that that's likely to be required. The one quirk here that's still remaining is that extra .1q tag container. I would like to get rid of those, and that's the thing that updating the groupings and IEEE would solve, and I'm liaising with them to do that. So once that's been fixed, the Yang should look like this and be a bit simpler to use is the plan. Right, so that covers what I've done to those two drafts. I want to quickly talk about my new draft and what's proposing to solve. That's the interface property issue. Glenn, do you want to comment on the previous one?
Sure, Glenn Parsons. So it's called outer tag and second tag?
Yes.
So this is is this what it was when you had we had discussed it within IEEE 802.1, or have you renamed it since?
I've renamed it. Before, it was like this. So it was a list of tags with an index in there where the first tag would have to have index 0, the second tag has to have index 1. You need the list there and the indices to be able to force it.
Right, okay, so right, we've seen it like this, we had problems with that. On the second one, I think IEEE 802 would have larger problems with you giving it names, because you're implying something now with it. Well, anyway, so I think you need to liaise it with us.
Yes, definitely.
At 802.1 on the use of VLAN tag, and this. I'm not sure. I think I know what you were trying to solve, but I'd like us to understand it a bit more, and the group to understand it some more.
Sure. Thank you. So in terms of interface properties, this is an issue that's already been covered in the draft, so it's really just a different solution for those problems. Thank you for trying to present here.
4 minutes.
Okay, examples of interface properties is a list of 6 sorts of different types of properties here. So rather than having properties bound to an interface, I would like to describe properties like it's a physical interface or virtual, sub-interface, point-to-point, multicast, Ethernet-like. And once you can add these new properties that are just defined as identities. There's a question as to who would manage or own these properties. Would it be IANA? Would it be a more expert group that needs to manage these? And once you've defined those as identities, you can then effectively use those in the IFANA IFTypes.yang. So whereas today there's a flat list of identities, I'm proposing that these get extended to also derive from the interface properties that those particular interface types have. So if it's an Ethernet interface, it would say, I have the property physical, I have the property that I do multicast, I have the property that I'm Ethernet-like. Or if you have a lag interface, it might say I'm the property that I'm a virtual interface. I also support multicast and I'm also Ethernet-like. There's open questions, again, as to how do you get this mapping right and who polices updates to this. So there's sort of procedural issues. But in terms of solving the technical problem, I think this works quite well. So it means that you go from having this sort of augment with a list of IF types, which isn't really extensible, because in future, if you have a new interface type defined, you have to go back and modify this Yang model to add that new interface type into that when statement to pick up the same leaf and the same namespace. Otherwise, you have to have perhaps the same leaf name in a new namespace for the new module. So that's what it's trying to solve. And instead, this is what it turns into. You simply have a when statement derived from the particular property that you're looking at instead. So that's what I'm trying to solve. Phil?
Can I suggest you add the contents of those two slides to your draft, because that will make reading the draft, the meaning of the draft much more obvious to the reader.
Okay, sure, yeah. So my real questions here is, who would manage this? And is it realistic the IANA would manage this? I think I was speaking to Jürgen earlier, he suggested that might not be a good idea. So in summary, who owns it? Who manages this stuff? I think defining the properties is backwards compatible. You can add new ones. I think adding them to interface types is also backwards compatible change. I think we could also release the existing drafts with dependencies on hard IF types and then change them to using interface properties over time. So I'm not sure it necessarily has to be gating. My question is the working group interested in adopting this draft? Are they interested in this idea? And if we do we delay the extension of VLAN drafts, or do we just proceed regardless?
We have time for one question.
Actually, it's more of a comment. I would prefer to finish more quick. Sorry, Dan Bogdanovic. I would prefer to finish more quickly and then revise later.
Yep.
The basic, the skeleton of the draft is there.
Yep.
Looks, that it provides, the functionality that is being looked for. So now to put in all the types and everything else what is needed, we can figure that out as we go.
Okay.
So is there interest in this final draft being taken into the working group? Does the working group think it's useful functionality? And is this a good place to start? Hands, please, for those of us who are deaf. Slightly deaf. So that's a reasonable number. Out of curiosity, how many people have read the draft? So it's actually less than the people who think that it's useful functionality, and this is a good place to start. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Glenn Parsons again. I would reiterate that. So I have not read the draft. So I'll preface it with that. But from what you presented, this has impact on the usage of VLANs and to the sub-interface model, and you have this alternative proposal. I think we'd like to understand that in 802.1 and what your proposals are. So either an informal liaison or a formal liaison.
That was the earlier draft. My understand that was in an existing working group draft, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
And you said that you were talking to people inside the IEEE to get feedback before completing this change.
Yes, I have done, but only one person within the IEEE, not the working group in general.
Okay, so if it makes sense to do a liaison, if you could work on some proposed text and bring it forward, and we'll do it a liaison.
I'll try and do it formally if I can first.
Absolutely, do it informally, but if you want
either
it
is fine. I'm just encouraging the discussion.
Yeah, if it's helpful for us to run a liaison, please have us do that. We can do it. You have 7 minutes, so until 50. It's on the screen also. Sorry.
Okay, great. This is easier. So hi everybody, I'm Alex Clem. So I wanted to talk about a Yang mount, and this is actually a draft that has been there for a while. It's basically the other mount. I mean, clearly, basically, there's the whole schema mount work and so forth, but actually there was another mount-related draft, and this concerns this one. And the problem that they have solved is actually slightly different. Basically, there are two aspects actually to this. One thing that we call alias mount, the other called peer mount, which basically means basically it's about essentially mounting and providing an alternative path to instance information that is already elsewhere in the tree, so that you have basically different paths how you can access that same data. Currently it's revision 6, but it has been actually kept virtually unchanged for a while now, and it's been kept dormant basically as the interest focus on schema mount. But the question is basically here, whether it will make sense to bring back and reactivate basically that work, particularly because the use cases for the original Yang mount also do remain valid and may to arguably actually get more pressing, in the sense that applications do require visibility, for instance, data that's not just instantiated on the server itself, but on other servers, or potentially also on the same server. And basically there are various use cases related to that, which are actually outlined in the draft, and actually I have a slide for this later as well. Okay, this is the okay. So basically, just in terms of comparison between the Yang mount and the Schema mount, so basically, Yang mount is very much to provide visibility, additional visibility to the data using different access paths. It's not to reuse existing definitions and insert them in a tree. And so basically, the analogy there is really basically that of a soft link. It's not basically as a modeling construct and basically something to extend those definitions. And likewise, also, unlike in Schema mount, there basically each mount point has an authoritative copy of the data that you're mounting there. Here, basically, the model is differently. Actually, the data that is mounted, the authoritative owner is wherever is the original location of the data. And this basically just provides you with this additional, link, with this additional access, if you will. Likewise, also there is actually emphasis is more on data retrieval. There's no validation of data or so at the mount point. This is also different from Schema mount, where you do of course need to do the validation. Here, basically, it's really just to provide this, to provide that access, and also. The number of data instances, of course, does not increase. If you mount a piece of data, it's still the same data, so you don't have, it's not an additional instance. So this is just to delineate, distinguish these.
Like 3 minutes.
3 more minutes. Okay. All right. Okay. So I need to hurry up a little bit, but so essentially, actually, maybe I can almost skip this very detailed slide. But basically, it's ultimately to provide these new path structures to superimpose them on top of those Yang data trees. This is a rough, basically rough conceptualization of what is going on there. So in this one, this will show a peer mount, basically remote mounted information, where you want to allow from one system, for instance, the one with the blue nodes that are depicted there, you would want to, for instance, mount information from different servers and allow this data to be essentially accessed to as if it were, basically locally part of that server without having to go to a different server. This does allow you to, for instance, realize the notion of a federated data store where you, for instance, treat the network as a system. You can basically access it to basically through a single server. You can basically have a borderless agent, if you will, since you're busting or breaking up the server-defined border. Okay. And obviously there are various, this is a basic concept, obviously there are various items to consider, from caching considerations, prohibiting circular mounting, and so forth. So the next steps of this are basically, as far as the draft is concerned, it's remained constant actually for quite some while. It's also basically part of this were basically incorporated into Open Daylight, which utilizes those concepts in the MD cell. Editorially, clearly, basically, there's some editorial cleanup that needs to occur. Also, the relationship really with Schema mount needs to be elaborated and extended. And but the question really is also, and the purpose of this presentation here is to ask actually the working group and solicit feedback if there's interest to move forward with this, if there's interest in this work, if there's actually interest in extending the mount point concept. And there's actually, I think, very natural complement to extend it to allow to refer or to impose these alternative path structures that allow you to refer to either local data or to remote data.
My thoughts exactly. That's exactly what I was going to ask the working group if there was interest. Comment?
So, well, Chris Hoppes, I was just going to say, I think this is also like a bind mount. Is that kind of the equivalent? Yeah.
What do you mean with bind mount?
That's a Linux thing. So like Symlink. I think it's a little closer to a bind mount. But where does it? So you don't have any pre-formatted schema, right? So how do you put it? How do you create the bind mount? It's a client-side thing to do?
No, actually, it's done on the server. You basically do declare basically the mount point that you have, and basically in this you define essentially, you do define basically the target node that you want to insert under that mount point, and from that point it is just it is just whatever is basically in that, whatever the instance information.
Right. But what drives the server to do it? Because it's not a schema thing, right?
Okay. What
We can
basically,
do this later since you're out of time.
we can talk about later, but basically...
You know, I'm sorry to do this, but we're really running out of time on this. And the question is there interest in the working group on the topic at all? And it's okay if you say we need more discussion. So we can ask it three ways. Is there interest? Do we need more discussion? And do we want to accept this document if the other two are if one is yes and the other is no? So do I start with, is there interest in this type of function in the working group? Is there interest in working on this function in the working group? So that's pretty tepid. How about interested in talking more, learning more? That's a bit more. I think it's premature to go to a working group document because we know the answer will be no because we need more time. Can we just take it to the list, Phil? Is it all right for you to take it to the list? Sure. Great, thank you.
That will be only what the next steps are then.
The next step is to discuss more on the list. They want to hear more, so describe more about your use case.
And now for the lightning round. My name is Joe Clark from Cisco. For those of you who were at OPSOG, OPSAWG yesterday, you've probably seen some of this. Ultimately, here's what we've got. We've got a great problem. Proliferation of Yang modules. A lot of modules being written across many SDOs, a lot of vendors implementing them. What Benoit has done is pulled together a number of very interested, passionate people about Yang to set up a number of tools to help people find the right Yang modules, understand how to use them, learn from best practices, and validate Yang modules. That's done with a number of open source tools at yangcatalog.org. What I'm going to present today is the draft that describes the backing store for yangcatalog.org. It is a Yang module that we have built to catalog metadata about Yang modules. Now, the intent of this, and I'll get to that, but Kent asked me to say it up front, is not necessarily to make this a working group document. Our intent is to be very transparent in our work. Our intent is to drive passion, to drive interest, to perhaps get people to contribute to the Yang catalog. And what the Yang catalog is, and I'll talk about use cases in a second, ability to collect metadata so that we can fuel these tools that will help people understand what Yang modules are available, find out where Yang modules are supported, and as I said, learn from the best practices of Yang authors. Now, some of you may have heard of the OpenConfig catalog model, which is a document here. As we started to implement this, as we started to create running code, we ran into some problems. As the OpenConfig catalog module evolved, it kind of deviated from what we needed. Initially, we needed a way of cataloging individual modules, and relative to that, their implementations. And they started to deviate from that in their O2 rev. In addition, we saw some discrepancies in terms of Yang regular expressions with what we needed for the daemon that was going to load and run and service this module. And there was some overlapping leafs in the OpenConfig catalog that seemed to contradict or at least confuse some of the points in the IETF Yang library. Our primary use cases with how we've structured this model, this Yang catalog model right now, is to first be able to, given a Yang model, find all of the metadata about it, as well as the platforms, the vendor platform and software releases that implement it, and given a vendor, a platform, and a software release, show all the Yang modules that they implement, their conformance level, their deviations, features, and so on. And we also want to be able to provide rich per module metadata, such as maturity, the document from where it was extracted, in the IETF, where was the originating working group, and then perhaps some other per SDO or per document author or organization metadata as well. Have to have a tree there, so this is the full tree as it stands in the 00 draft. We are also, as I'll say on the last slide, working with the new semantic versioning kind of rapid development approach here. So in our GitHub repository, this has already changed based on what we learned from the hackathon. And Kent pointed out something very excellent in that this is basically just Yang data. We don't actually have a server. So when you start to see things like conformance here, deviation here, describing a module, that doesn't have any relevance. So what we're going to do is pull that out and put that into the implementation section. And this also is hopefully going to help inform the BIS work happening in the NetConf group on maybe we can create more modular groupings in the Yang library so we don't have to kind of copy and paste their work. We can use it directly from Yang library. Just real quick, two elements of this that might not be obvious. One is compilation status. Benoit has been doing a great amount of work, thanks in part to all the developers who built great Yang validation tools, to be able to run Yang modules through a number of validations. As modules are registered with the catalog, we will run them against these validators. We will record that compilation status as well as the output, and that will be metadata in the Yang catalog. I mentioned maturity level earlier. What I mean by that, and some of these terms are likely to change, we want to say how trusted is a module. Is it an initial individual draft? Has it been formally adopted by a standards organization? Or is it ratified by a standards organization? That can help a module consumer know that, yeah, I can pretty much trust that this isn't going to change or that I can rely on this. And it can help another module developer understand that the type defs or the semantics in such a module can be trusted and perhaps used as a best practice or a learning example. Initially, we thought of trying to map that with vendors, and Benoit pointed out that that's probably going to get dangerous with how vendors tend to work. So we're going to add a new element for not applicable, where we're primarily focusing maturity at the SDO level, or Standards Development Organization level. Our second subtree is the vendor tree. So as I mentioned, given a vendor, given a platform, given a software release, show me all the modules, and this is where we're going to move our conformance data. So you'll also be able to see what conformance level, is it import, is it implement, what features are there, and what deviations exist on a per module, per implementation basis. And finally, yes, 3 minutes. The intent, as I mentioned, is not necessarily, this could change. We are rapidly developing this, but our intent is not necessarily to make this a working group document, not necessarily to push this towards ratification, but to be very open with what we're trying to do. Because we believe, in our experience, Benoit, myself, others who have gathered to do this work, believe that it is very important to have these metadata focused tools around Yang modules to ensure the success of adoption in our users, customers, whatever you want to call them. Our development is happening openly in GitHub. We plan on pushing another revision of this module relatively soon. However, it is already dramatically changed with what I presented from a 0.0 draft standpoint. A lot of that based on testing from Juniper, from Huawei, from others at Hackathon 99. So I ask you, if you're interested and you want to contribute, there's a link to contribute to the catalog. You can sign up to our announce list at announce@yangcatalog.org, where we'll be sending out updates, and use the tools. We've already had a few examples that I've seen here at the meeting of Yang module developers using these tools. They're there for you to use. They're there for you to extend. Questions?
Awesome. Rick Taylor, very quick question. Why is it not your intention to try and standardize this, try and get acceptance in the working group to get this published? Why do you want to keep it sort of individual, to use your classification of models, when it could be useful?
Benoit will answer this, but I'm going to answer first, and then he's going to tell me everywhere I'm wrong. We are working right now on this semantic versioning approach. You may have seen the SemVer draft. It's got Benoit's name on it. Richard Barnes was a very big contributor to it. We want to do more rapid development of Yang modules, and we feel that this module is going to continuously evolve as we develop new use cases. For that reason, we were thinking, if we try to fit into the stricture of standardization too soon, it might hinder our work in making this module truly useful. That said, if semantic versioning really takes off, if this really looks like a promising thing, it could be that we could periodically synchronize back to the IETF with an RFC nameplate on it and continue to iterate our work in a repository like GitHub. Now, Benoit, tell me how wrong I was.
You did great. Thanks, Benoit Claes. So one more thing is that we keep adding new things all the time based on the hackathon. Typically, you know, I was compiling all these modules. Some of the vendor modules are native models because they're generated. So obviously, I mean, not obviously, but they fail. For example, they're not fully compliant with 67 bis. So, okay, we're adding a new leaf. Is it generated? Because if it is, I mean, it doesn't matter. Next one is, okay, I was just taking a note now. We're actually missing whether it's a service model or network element model. We've got this draft in the RFCQ right now. Another one is, okay, we've been speaking about NMDA. We're adding now the NMD, the tree type. So, you know, it keeps evolving so rapidly based on people using that. So that's the idea, but it could be standardized maybe later, but it's not the end goal.
Phil Schaefer, Juniper Networks, and also, you know, standardizations for interoperability. What does this interoperate with? You know, if you change your schema, who's gonna care? This is an internal tool, and there's just no need for standardization. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. With that, we're actually over time, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
If you have the blue sheets, can you please bring them to the front?
We look forward to continued discussion on the list and see you at the next meeting. What's that? Thanks. All right. Yes. It's all came together okay. Well, I mean, it's usual.
We pulled it in at the end.
We got it.